but does have that just natural defense. It's just he's very hard to land a punch on.
You must have thought, as many of us did after that debate, what happened. And no?
No, I didn't.
What's your explanation?
I assume he would. It's not really so much of an explanation, but the incumbent always loses the first one. That's all. That's just a rule in politics.
That badly?
Well, maybe not that badly, but but he's at a natural disadvantage, and he's at a double disadvantage because he's someone who's burdened by the truth. He knows the limitations of the office. He has a hard time doing what Romney has been doing. He's just standing up and lying, and which a lot of people, which politicians do. In that form, it doesn't. You're not penalized for it. In the short term, it's kind of smart, but if you're setting up yourself to govern, it's not. You're going to pay a price for that. But in the short term, maybe you won't, because people don't know what's true and what's not true. And since these days, Americans generally are so suspicious of anything that's in the media that you can't be corrected. If you say that I'm not going to cut taxes by $5 trillion when you are, and your website says you are, nobody even blinks. They don't think I'm not going to vote for that guy because he's dishonest. They're going to say, oh, he's not going to do that. But Obama's in a different position. He has a record. And so I was expecting I just assumed it wasn't going to be great. But I watched it, and I kind of thought, it didn't bother me that much. I assumed also, this was just guessing. He didn't talk to me about how he was preparing for the debate. And I wasn't that interested. I was writing about, because I was writing about the office, not the campaign. But I assumed that he looked so far ahead, it looked like he was going to be able to kind of coast to it, that some part of his mind was saying, just don't engage, that there's no upside. And it might actually cost me to get into the fight. And then he was woken up and he was told, this isn't going to be easy. They're not going to just hand it to you. And
I thought he maybe couldn't believe what he was hearing.
Well, that's got to be part of it, right?
Which was probably the right.
Well, that's probably part
conclusion.
of it too, right? Is that this person was saying completely different things than he had been saying.
Different person than we'd seen for 6 months.
Yeah, so I think that's probably part of it too. But whether that was a big deal or not, let's wait. On November 7th, people may have completely forgotten that first debate.
Yeah.
You just don't know how important it was. It looks temporarily like it might have been important, but who knows?
So you mentioned that you went to Cartagena with him. Where else did you go? And what was it like on Air Force One?
The only foreign trip. He told me you got to come on a foreign trip just because those are different. So that's why I went to Colombia with him. And it didn't. I was 4 or 5 days, and not a word of it ended up in the piece. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of stuff I did with him that I just didn't end up writing about. I went several domestic trips. You kind of forget where you are because Air Force One, you're on Air Force One. But I went an energy trip where we visited solar panels all over the West. I went to Florida with him a couple of times. He did a college lecture tour. He went to North Carolina and Boulder to the University of Colorado.
Most of it was domestic, though.
All of it was domestic except the trip to Colombia. And Air Force One, it's it's unusual in a lot of ways, but the way it's structured is basically the further you get to the back, the lower your status, and the journalists are in the way back. And interestingly, it's a really loud plane because it needs big engines because it's especially heavy, and the noise is concentrated in the back. And so when they come back to breathe, you can't hear anything. The journalists can't hear anything. It's a very odd situation. In front of the journalists, you walk through the plane, you've got they're like rooms full of ninjas, guys in black with machine guns, and then there was a room where they put me. There was a room where it was kind of traveling cabinet secretaries or congressmen or people who the president was giving a lift to, and there were 8 seats in a space like from there to there. There are 8 seats, and the food is extremely heavy. You always got off feeling like you've been drugged. Everything. I mean, it was just.
All of this seems purposeful.
Yeah, well, I mean, fondue is not airplane food. And all you'd want is a green salad, and they'd come out with this like vat of cheese and bread, and you'd be hungry, and you'd have to eat it, and you'd just be, you're in a torpor. And in fact, that was a problem. I was always jet lagged when I saw him. The only time I've been with him when I wasn't kind of feeling a little not myself was when he was here last week. Because I'd always just taken a red eye to Washington and then hopped on Air Force One or gone to the White House, and I always felt like I just didn't feel right. And the trip to Cartagena, I was just exhausted by the time we'd stopped in Florida and we were in the air on our way to South America, and they brought the fondue or whatever it was, and I ate some of the fondue, and I just went boom, and I was out. And I was betting that he didn't want to talk to me. I was banking on it. I was banking that we could get to Colombia without him coming back to find me. Uh-huh. And I was, my mouth open and drool coming out. And all of a sudden, someone's shaking my shoulder, and I look up, and it's him looking down at me. And I kind of said, "What are you doing? What is this? And is that really you? Because it's such a strange thing to wake up to the president over." And that was another time he was a little irritated. What are you doing, falling asleep when I've got half an hour? Come on. And then his part of the plane is what would be the fanciest, but it's actually kind of. There's a conference room, and he's got a little bedroom, but it's a single bed, and it's like sleeping on a sofa. Mm-hmm. And there are TVs all over the plane, and they're all on ESPN all the time. It's just on a loop. It's ESPN. There's nothing but sports on the plane.
You wrote also about the configuration of the plane, and the section that you were sitting in has a big door.
Yes, and it was for the president's coffin. It was designed so that it could carry, the president's coffin could be easily put on and taken off, because it's just assumed that the president dies away from where he's going to his final resting place. Air Force One will collect him and take him where he needs to go. And Reagan's coffin was carried in Air Force One. Reagan designed, the plane was ordered up by Reagan. He never flew in it alive. He flew in it dead. And
he never flew in it alive?
No. According to the people who give you, the people who work on board give you a little tour. And they take out your chair. Where I was sitting, the chairs and the tables all come out, and the coffin comes in. And this was something, a kind of leitmotif in his life is death. There's such morbidity to the office.
You're talking about Obama.
Well, the presidency. You have people basically on a assassination watch. You're immediately aware you're not allowed to go anywhere without a press pool. Not because the press pool is actually interested in, say, you coaching your girls' basketball game, because they're not even allowed to see it. They're off in another room beside the basketball court. They're there in case you get shot, and that's the only reason they're there. He actually said this is a morbid office, that you're just surrounded by that all the time.
And there's a surgery unit there. Yes,
he's got his own operating room, and I don't know if a president's ever been. I probably never, but that you can. If you need your appendix out, they can take it out on Air Force One. Yeah, and then I mentioned they showed me, I opened some cabinets just to see what they had, and I couldn't believe there was such a thing called an anti-cyanide kit. It was like something out of James Bond. But there's some big thing and it says anti-cyanide kit. So it's an unusual plane, but it's the main thing about it. From my point of view, it was incredibly useful because it was the one place where when unexpected gaps appeared in his day, there was no one to seize them. I was there, and there were a few other people, but they weren't there to take his time, and so he could just get up. If the president of France decides he doesn't need to have the phone call, then Obama would just come back and grab me. That was the way to the verbal games I wanted to play with him. That was the best place to do it.
Sounds like he was having fun with you and enjoyed it.
I think it's just generally true.
Or it was a break from the usual.
It was definitely different because I wasn't, asking him how he was going to fix the deficit. And it was never going to be interesting to have that conversation. It was just going to be dull or useful in any way to have that conversation. So those sorts of conversations, no, because it was more about the quotidian details of just the life and how you one adjusted for it so you didn't get screwed up, and so you were most likely to make a decent decisions. Now, when I decided that I wanted to build the piece around a real decision, we did have to get into it about what had happened in Libya. So I did have some long conversations with him about that. But he was interested even in talking about that because no one had talked to him about it. He wasn't badgered about it, and because he was obviously kind of pleased with the decision. It had worked out well.
This was prior to
Right.
the
This was
9/11.
Correct.
Yeah.
This was the decision what to do about Gaddafi moving across the desert to exterminate a city of people in Benghazi.
In general, I would say that this is either a neutral or a fairly positive piece about him. Is there anything negative that you found? And if so, why was it not there?
There wasn't anything. The only terms I had with the White House was with the president's quotes, things that were in quotes. I had to check with them. And so I sent them just pages of quotes, raw quotes without any context. And they nixed a couple of them, but they nixed them, they were trivial. They nixed them because they thought it was going to offend a friend of his, but it didn't have any, it wasn't really, it didn't matter to me what they took. And the fact of the matter was, if they had nixed them all, I'd just taken out of quotes and said, there it is.
There were plenty more.
There was not they didn't really interfere with me at all. Never asked me what I was going to write. Never. No one ever asked, what's your angle or anything like that. Never.
There was a little mini journalism kerfuffle about
the quotes, which
about
is
the quotes
which
that
is
you
absurd.
agreed to let them
It was
check the
absurd
quotes.
because it's standard operating procedure until the New York Times just changed it. But it was the standard operating procedure for the New York Times. It was and the idea. Think about this. Do you want your president to let a journalist into his life the way he let me in, and just be able to say he said this in quotes, and without having any? I mean, I was afraid. I was actually afraid I was going to manage to bring down the country one way or another because I didn't know what I was doing. So I wasn't. For me, some part of me thought I was kind of relieved that they just check and make sure I didn't, wasn't about to, start a war.
Yeah.
But it didn't have any effect. And they were letting me just see things kind of unvarnished. And there was lots of accidental things that I was able to see. No, I didn't. So I didn't shade it any way. That I just wrote what I thought and what I saw. And I thought, just as a general rule about him, if you were going to kind of try to attack him, where would you put your fingers on? He has a tendency in his personality, and this I think comes across a bit in the piece, but he has a tendency to it's almost a little cocky. It's a little and it's when he's not totally sure. He's like an athlete. And athletes do this when they're before the game. They pump themselves up. There's this kind of swagger, and it's because they aren't completely sure, and it leads them to actual confidence. He fakes confidence before he feels it a bit. It isn't offensive, but you see it. It's a tinny quality too. You can see him when he's genuinely confident, and you can see him when he's kind of faking it to get there to himself. I think he uses his smile the same way. And it's actually true. People say that if you smile, if you make yourself smile, you will actually be happier. And I think it's absolutely true. If you force yourself to certain expressions, you will start to feel the emotion associated with the expression. So I think he's learned how to just use his smile to make himself happy. And so I might worry with that character trait. Generally, I'd say, if you're going to criticize him, it's some of his personality traits, which are admirable personality traits, which you would like in a president, are actually liabilities in the political system. So I think things cost him. I mean, I think he's a genuinely honest person. I mean, he doesn't lie to you.
You called him a cool cat when you were talking to Rachel Maddow.
Well, but he's an interesting cat, is what I call him. He's an interesting cat. He's an interesting person, but he's an honest person. So it's just a lot of things that he doesn't have there's not you do see with political people, not just political people, a lot of people, between their brain and their mouth, there's this filter, and they're thinking about how it sounds. And he doesn't do that in conversation. He says a lot of things that that are just honest. He feels honest. And that's, I think, getting back to the first debate, he is, I think, more burdened by the truth than a lot of people who are in that office are. He's very aware that, I could say I've got this plan to solve the deficit, but I know that I don't have those powers. That there's only so much.
I could keep the price of gas really low.
Yeah, I can keep the price. Yeah,
but
it's baloney. It's just baloney.
Yeah.
So I think his nature is honest, and that's a problem. I think it's more useful to a politician to not have that. I think he's got a literary disposition, and that is this detachment thing. It comes across to some people as aloof. I never saw anything like aloof. Just the opposite. You never feel like he's playing status with pulling rank. But what he does do is kind of steps outside a situation. He looks at it in a meta kind of way, and as a way a writer would look at it, and crafting a narrative out of it. And that I think very useful in day-to-day life. Maybe hamstrings you a bit as a president. It sends the wrong signal. He's the thing about flattering. I give you a good example of this. How he's the opposite of flattery, the way he deals with people. When we were playing basketball, it was a catastrophe for me. I mean, it was so over my head, it was embarrassing. And it was essentially a stud college basketball game with a lot of 28-year-olds. And he didn't warn me. He just threw me into it, and it was awful. And it started with him benching me. And I'm actually not that bad. But I mean, I'm not like a dork. I can play basketball. And after the first game where he benched me to start the game, we were just kind of shooting. And I went out and I made 3 or 4 three-point shots in a row. And one of the guys says, "Man, you can actually shoot." And Obama walks over, and instead of saying, "Yeah, you can," trying to make me feel better about this catastrophe, I start to shoot another one. And he reaches over and he puts his hands in my eyes. And the ball glances off the rim, and he goes, "Maybe that's the problem." And he said, it was like, you can only shoot when nobody's on you. So that isn't useful in a politician. He briefly lost my vote. For that moment, I was about to vote for Romney.
What did you learn about him playing basketball with him?
It's a very strange game for a president to be in because it's physically dangerous. He's had, I don't know how many stitches in his mouth, and he had teeth knocked out.
And is anybody tentative about playing with him?
That's the first thing you learn, is that he creates an environment, demands an environment where everybody treats him just like everybody else. The guy, you can't tell who's president watching the game. He is, when he can be abused, they abuse him. I thought it was amazing that when he was wide open for shots, people wouldn't throw it to him because there was someone else who's a better shooter.
So
how do you not pass to the
ego?
open president of the United States? And he has just demanded that that's not the way it's going to be. I want it to be real. And he's good enough. He's not as, well, I was going to say he's not as good as he thinks he is, but he actually doesn't think, he's not as much better than me as he thinks he is. I'd say that's true. But he's figured out how to play in this game. He's done it, and he can function in this game. And it's kind of impressive that at his age, and that he was just a high school basketball player.
Not a starter.
Not even a starter, but he was on a very good basketball team. They won the state championship in Hawaii. But so that he demands that environment, and he wants to be in that environment, in a really challenging kind of environment, in a real environment. I think that's, it's curious. If I were president, I know exactly what kind of basketball game I would create for myself. Everybody would be just that much worse than me. So it would be plausible, it'd look like a plausible game, but I get to shoot all the time. And my team would always win. And he's not that way. That's not
His team doesn't always win.
No, it's really, it's serious. That's the other thing. He actually benched me because he said to me, we're going to wait till we get a lead and then we'll bring you in. And that because he actually wanted to win that much.
Did you do this more than once?
We played 7 games. I mean, so it went on for an hour, 2 and some
Oh, it
hours.
wasn't one instance,
It was just one
7
instance.
games.
Yeah. Best of 7.
Yeah.
It was a lot. We spent a lot. It was in the FBI gym. And the other thing is, when the president plays basketball, it's a little strange to be playing pickup basketball, and the only thing that's in the gym with you are 4 guys with automatic weapons, and a medical team in case someone knocks the president's teeth out, and the nuclear football, which is and that's what's in the gym with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask if anyone in the audience has a question. We have about 8 more minutes. Jean Weiniger first.
Can I just speak?
Yeah,
You may.
I'll repeat it if it's.
Okay. I was really interested in the section in your article where you talked about his decision-making and in that meeting about Libya, and where he makes a decision by having his mind occupy all the different positions and
In the room.
and asks the junior people around the edges who wouldn't necessarily normally even speak. He wants their opinion too, to really.
Get
Yeah,
to the
he
point.
wants-
This was something.
Yeah.
This wasn't because I wasn't in those meetings. It was before that happened before my time with him. It was all recreated, and I interviewed the people in the room. And so these are descriptions of the people who were in the room with him of him. And one of them they're all Obama watchers. And a young guy said, it's interesting to watch him do this in a room because what he's doing, he likes to imagine, as you said, he likes to imagine himself holding the view of whoever is expressing the view, just trying to see if that view feels right to him. But another person said, often when he's made up his mind, he wants to hear all the views because he wants to cherry pick the best arguments for his own view. And in the case of Libya, he swears to me that he did not make up his mind until the last possible minute. He could see doing nothing. He could see, so he was genuinely torn about this. But he asked the junior people in the room what their views are because he knows what their views are. He knows the people around the center, the big shots, don't want to have anything to do with military intervention in Libya. They're saying, do not do this. Do not go save those people in Benghazi. But he knew that if he asked the junior people, he'd hear the argument for doing something. So he at least wanted to hear the argument. But he swears
this
he
is
did.
not just on this decision, but in general.
He does. He said that this decision, it was especially it was especially peculiar how many young people around the room were asked to speak up. But the people who work for him tell me that is generally true of him. That he will go to other people in the room who aren't normally, in most presidencies, consulted for their views, and they're asked to say what they think. It is different.
Dave.
In terms of preparation for the job, there's a lot of management involved in being president. And as far as I can tell, he really never had a responsibility where he managed much of anything. As you kind of lived with him and observed him, what kind of a manager is he, and with a different kind of preparation in some part of his coming to the presidency have been helpful?
This is a really good question. And the answer is I don't know. But what we can say about him is he has managed one thing. He managed that campaign. And it was an incredible campaign. And if you watch, even now, even with his debate performance, the performance of his campaign versus the Romney campaign generally, it's a very well-run operation. And so that would have been the biggest thing he'd managed, probably, right? I mean, he did his community organizing work, but you read that book and it sounds kind of chaotic, and it sounds like there were kind of 3 people who were working for him. So that doesn't count. He had a Senate office, but that's not much either. So it's a good question whether like major management, like business management experience, would be that useful. Or a governorship, yeah. Right? And one assumes so. I think that it's a bit of a canard to the view that this sort of the assumption that business management is what you need for government management, because it's such a different environment. You can't just order people around, really, and you can't give people huge raises or toss them out of their jobs if you're just angry with them. And it's this notion that what we need is Jack Welch in there to run things well. That's probably silly. But a governor's job would be the closest thing. What kind of manager is he?
Does he have to manage?
Yes, but he has to manage. There's only so much a person can do, so he has to delegate is what he has to do. And I'd say, we did talk about this. I talked about, every president makes horrible hiring decisions when they come in. Some of the people they hire work out, and some of them don't. And he had some personnel problems early on, wrong people in the jobs kind of thing. And he said that the mistake he thinks he made, if you could generalize about it, was that he was picking star athletes rather than people who worked well with the team. And he's through that phase. He's over the star athlete thing. He just wants people who can work well with the team.
Like Stephen Chu, Tim Geithner,
Larry
the stars
Summers.
of,
I think there's some. So I think he was aware that he made some systematic errors, but I also think he thinks that some error is inevitable because there are just so many decisions you're making so quickly. I'd say, as a manager, I tell you this, that the people who work for him love him. And that's, it isn't worshipful. They just really, they love the guy. And it's because he treats them well. He treats people very well. The Secret Service that protect him love him. He wears this watch that's a goofy looking watch. It looks like a scuba diving watch. It's got all the knobs, and so they can tell you what you look over there and you expect to see odometer on it. It's got all these, and it's so out of character because everything about him is so spare and minimalist. At some point I said, your watch just doesn't fit you. That's an odd thing that you have that watch. I've been looking at that watch as a geeky, dorky watch, and you're kind of cool, and that's kind of odd, And he said, I'll tell you about this watch. He said, when I was in the campaign, the first campaign, Michelle and I just started inviting the Secret Service in to have, they weren't getting fed, when they were watching me. And they just come in and we'd have them in. And they said, I don't know if I can say this on, well, he said that previous presidents didn't treat them that way. And the Secret Service had pooled their money to give him this watch. And he wore it because of that. And he has that kind of the loyalty, not just from the people who protect him, but the people who work for him feel that way too. He creates, and I watched him do this with me, a safe place for people to operate in. They don't feel like they're going to be backstabbed or they're going to be subject to the whims of some kind of whimsical leader. They feel safe with him. And so I saw it happen with me because whenever I would walk into a room, it became an unsafe environment for the people who were in it. And he was very careful to either say, Michael, you got to leave, or Michael's here, he's going to put away his notepad, and this is totally off the record. And make it very clear so he didn't pander to me, he made it comfortable for the people who worked for him. So he's that way. And he's a very intelligent guy. I suspect, my sense is, if I go back, there's a chance I'm going to go back and do more of this if he gets reelected. And one of the things I would want to pick at is which he could talk about more freely if he's reelected, is sort of what did you learn on the job that you actually stunk at when you started, and that you figured out since? And there was no point in me really asking him that question now, because he can't talk about it, but he can talk about it in a couple of months. You mean, is being president like being at other things? Is that?
I suppose, did you see, are there universal leadership qualities in the office, or does the office itself surpass anything that we can imagine it might be?
Is it like leading a business or a country or a state or something?
Yes.
Or
I think it's
beyond all
I think
of
it's sui
that?
generis. I think there's nothing like it, and it's nothing like it because because the powers of presidential speech are just different from the other people's speech, and because the powers of the office, they're erratic. You're not God. But sometimes you have God-like powers. You can, with a flick of your wrist, just because you want to do it, save the lives of 1 million people in the desert in Libya. And it's an incredible thing. And so that makes it, I just think the stake, that's what the difference is. The stakes are so much higher than in any other leadership position in the world. Nobody could save those people in Libya except us.
Or watch while they take down Osama bin Laden.
Right. Yeah. So that's the difference. So I think. I think it's obviously related to other things. Probably being a governor is maybe the closest thing, or the head of another state. But it's hard to think of anything that's quite like it.
Mm-hmm. One more question, Robbie.
Yeah. So I'm an American government teacher, and I work in the Berkeley Unified Schools. And I've noticed higher levels than I would ever expect of cynicism. And I grew up in Berkeley, and so I shared some of that cynicism too. Just I think it's in some ways part of our liberal environment, but a lot of my students are becoming libertarians and that kind of thing. And not that there's anything wrong with that.
But you got to mention it.
Yeah, I think it shows a distrust of government on another level. And so I guess my question is there anything that you learned personally yourself, or this question, you could also interpret it, what would Obama say to this question? Is there anything you learned that would make any of my students think that they might want to be in politics someday? Because when I asked them, they almost universally said, no, it's a dirty game, that it's not the kind of thing that I couldn't be myself, I'd have to sell out and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering what you would say, having had this experience, and also maybe what the president would say.
Well, I'd be a hypocrite if I gave them the speech about why they should go into government, because my first reaction after a day with Obama was even though I was playing this game with him, I'm the president and you're not. If you gave me the job, I wouldn't take it. It's horrible. I mean, I just feel, but it is if you have a certain kind of social conscience, and you have a certain kind of feeling about your ability to work your will in that environment, that's how change happens. That's how things happen. So you can just say, I'm not going to participate, but the machinery is still going to grind along. And I'd say, there's always been, I grew up with that same cynicism about it. I grew up in New Orleans, so I have more of a reason for it. But just a thought, anybody who was in politics was a bozo. They were either a liar but it didn't matter. They didn't matter. They were off over there, and you didn't want to have anything to do with them. And the guys who ran for junior class president, everybody laughed at. It was that. I grew up with that too. So I sympathize, empathize even with your students. At the same time, I don't think, I'm amazed by the absence of cynicism given the current environment in young people. The people, Obama is surrounded by young people who really believe they can do good in government. Washington is filled with young people who really think they can do good in government. And the campaigns, it isn't all cynical. So I think that it's very hard to make the case to someone who has the view of your students that they should go into as an occupation. But I would say to them this, that if you had my experience, if you just spent a day with the president, you'd cut him a lot of slack. You would say, wow. Read the piece. He's saving lives. That he's doing things, he's doing very important work, and the spirit in which he operates is, given the circumstances, extraordinarily pure. So I think that they would not have, I don't think their cynicism would withstand actual contact with the man in the office.
You can assign the tell him to watch it online and see what Michael had to say to you.
So I got to go put Walker to bed.
Okay, thank
right,
you
I
very
promised him I'd
much.
read a book.
Thanks to Michael Lewis. Great. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks to all of you for coming. And thank you very much to the Weiniger family and friends for sponsoring this. And don't forget, we're building 4 new libraries, and you can help us.